Hi everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Overcoming the Hurdles to Customer Excellence. My name is Dina Otero, and I'll be hosting this webinar along with Megan Burns and Stacy Neville. So just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. We will be hosting a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions in the chat window on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Additionally, the recording will be available after the event, so please keep an eye out for the recording within 24 to 48 hours. So let's get started. Confirmit enables organizations to develop and implement voice of the customer, employee engagement, and market research programs. Confirmit solutions provide technology and expertise that deliver high ROI to leading companies across a variety of industries. Today we're joined by Megan Burns and Stacy Neville. Megan serves as a customer experience professional at Forrester Research. She's a leading expert on customer experience management, maturity, benchmarking, governance, and ROI. She is the creator of Forrester's Customer Experience Maturity Framework and manages the Customer Experience Index. Stacy Neville is a seasoned engagement management professional with 18 years of experience managing employee and customer loyalty programs for both the client and vendor side of the business. Stacy is an expert in the linkage between VOC, VOE, and operational metrics to positively impact customer loyalty and product usability. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Megan.
Thanks, Dina, and thanks everyone for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. They've asked me to speak this morning about some hurdles to customer experience excellence, and I could talk all day about that. Customer experience is not for the faint of heart, but I wanted to zero in on 5 challenges that I see quite commonly facing clients as they try to launch and then lead their customer experience programs, and some of the things I've seen from the research that work to get past them. And one of the things that I find helpful as I think about why is this customer experience thing so hard is having an analogy or a metaphor that helps us understand the nature of what the challenge really is. And the best one that I've come up with to date is that customer experience is the eat healthy and exercise of the business world. No one is going to tell you that eating healthy and exercising are not important. Everyone knows that. And we all mean well. And yet, in the United States, according to the CDC, 80% of adult Americans do not get as much exercise or physical activity as we should. And when we look at the data on how many vegetables we eat, it's pretty surprising. There are only 3 states that are in that dark green color. And when I looked at this, I assumed that that meant that they were the 3 states getting the 5 to 7 servings a day that we're supposed to get. Nope. Those are the only ones getting more than 1.8. So we've got this disconnect between something that we all know is important, and we have very high stakes in doing it, and yet we don't do it. Why? Well, part of the reason is, frankly, we're not sure what to do. Right? What's healthy? You go to the grocery store and you see something like this. How are you supposed to know which of these products on the shelves are healthy and which ones aren't, especially when they're all making various types of health claims? And if you try to find out and do some research, you can certainly Google, and you'll notice that you get 244 million results back in a half a second. Seems like it would be a great thing, but it's a little bit overwhelming. And even when you dig into those results, you say, okay, I'm only going to trust the information that I find from really reputable sources. Well, guess what? I've got 4 of them. I've got Time Magazine, US News, WebMD, and Harvard School of Public Health. So part of the reason that we don't eat healthy, quote unquote, is that a lot of people aren't really sure what healthy is. Every time you turn around, something is good for you, then it's bad for you, and it's hard to figure out what to do. And we don't have a lot of time to spend figuring it out, nor do we have a lot of time to spend exercising. Now this wasn't a problem 100 years ago, right? Real food was the only option, and it required quite significant exertion of physical effort just to get that food. So the concept of exercise as a separate thing was irrelevant. we didn't need to do that. But in today's world, where this is what the evenings look like for many of us and our families, the concept of exercise is important, and it's something that we need to figure out how to work in. So it's not that we don't know that eating healthy and exercise are important to us. It's that the world around us has changed and made it such that in order to do these things that seem like common sense and that seem like they would really benefit us, it takes a significantly larger amount of discipline than it ever has to do those things. This is exactly what's going on in customer experience, and it's one of the biggest challenges that I think as a profession we face in customer experience. Right? Most people know that customer experience matters. They've always known that it matters, and they believe truly that it matters. But there's this gap between what we know and what we do. And I think many of the challenges, and in particular the 5 that I'm going to highlight this morning, really stem directly from this disconnect between our intentions and our actions. So most people want to do the right thing when it comes to customer experience, but most of them, or at least a lot of them, don't actually know what customer experience is. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that in just a second. They underestimate what it takes to do CX really well. The amount of discipline that it takes, the amount of connection that it takes. This is not easy to do in today's world. They think that measurement is the same as customer understanding. And this one I think is particularly relevant to this audience because it talks a lot about these Voice of the Customer programs and what we do with the information that we gather them and why we're gathering that information in the first place. They aren't necessarily sure what to do differently. And when I say that, I mean on a very personal level. I walk into the office every morning, I turn on my laptop, and I used to do X and now I need to do Y. Well, I'm not quite sure what Y is. And then finally, too many companies, I think, believe that employee motivation is the problem. That we just have to motivate employees to want to deliver a good customer experience, and once we do that, all the rest of it will fall into place. Motivation is certainly important, but I don't think it's as much of a problem as many organizations think it is. And so I'll give you some ideas on how to maybe shift your thinking about what the problem is to really get some action going using the motivation that you've already got in place. So let me take you through a little bit more about each of these challenges, and then the most important part, what do you do about them? Starting with this first one. Most people don't really know what customer experience is. Well, we have a definition of customer experience at Forrester, and it reads like this: how customers perceive their interactions with your company. And there are 2 really important words in this definition. The first is perceive. The customer experience is subjective, and it is subjective in the customer's mind. Our opinions, though interesting as employees of a company, are completely irrelevant because whatever the customer perceives is their reality. And that's a very different mindset for a lot of organizations. I was with a group once that was talking about communications they sent out to customers, and they classified them. And they were showing the results of when they asked clients to classify those emails. And they said, oh, clients classified these as marketing emails, but they're wrong. No, they're not. If the client thinks it's a marketing email, it's a marketing email. It doesn't matter what you intended it to be. So those perceptions are really important. The other piece is interactions. In many, many organizations, there's still a mindset that, oh, customer experience, you mean customer service. Not true at all. It is every interaction. When customers are discovering your products, as they're evaluating them, as they're buying them, as they're accessing them, using them, and getting support for them, those are all interactions with the company. They all make up parts of the customer experience. And most importantly, they all play a role in determining whether or not the customer is going to stay a customer or take their business elsewhere. And so we have to step back and broaden our thinking and help others in the organization broaden their thinking to realize that the experience is every touch that we have with the customer. In fact, I wrote a case study last year about AT&T Mobility, the wireless division, and they did some research and found out that two of the biggest determinants of the company's performance on customer service experiences were things that had actually happened in marketing and things that had happened in retail. So the stage is set for interactions all the way through this life cycle, and so we've got to get this mindset to expand a little bit. But I think part of the reason that we stay a little bit more narrowly focused is because trying to branch out to something at that scale is really hard. And it underestimates what it takes to do customer experience well across all of those interactions at an enterprise level. Because we know from our research that customer experience, good customer experience, absolutely leads to profits, but only if you treat it as a discipline. It is becoming a formal discipline. There is a Customer Experience Professionals Association with more than 2,000 members. There are particular skills and things in customer experience, and so people need to learn and get familiar with what it actually takes to be good at this. Now in most organizations, if I say, tell me about your customer experience management program, here's what they tell me. They basically talk about their Voice of the Customer program, identifying issues, prioritizing changes, coordinating implementation, and measuring results. And that is absolutely an important part of customer experience management. But I hesitate to use the word management because I think of this part of the process as customer experience triage. If you're waiting until customers have a problem to look at the experience and do something about it, what you're basically doing is playing customer experience whack-a-mole. Now, we need this kind of a reactive system. We absolutely do. It's a safety net. No one is perfect. Things will change in the outside. We need something to tell us that our experience needs to adjust. But if you stop here, you are not getting the most benefit out of customer experience management that you can. So once again, we need to step back and expand our view of what customer experience management is and what it means. And we have to understand the fact that your customer experience is not something that one group does, or even a handful of groups. It's the result of interconnected actions across an entire ecosystem. And when we talk about the customer experience ecosystem, we talk about it as the web of relations among all aspects of a company, including its customers, employees, partners, and operating environment that determine the quality of the customer experience. I often think about this as 6 degrees of separation from the customer. So you may think that you have very little interaction with the customer, maybe no interaction, but there's often a ripple effect between the decision somebody makes in the back office that flows through to affected employee who does in fact talk to a customer. Right? There are all of these ripple effects. And so managing customer experience requires managing those webs of relations and understanding how they all come together and how the customer-facing aspects of the business combine with the behind-the-scenes operations as well as the operating environment, how the decisions that people make at each of those levels affects the customer experience. And there are specific things, specific habits that people at all of those levels can do to have a much more proactive approach to customer experience management. And we talk about those practices as being the foundation of customer experience maturity. When an organization is mature and good at customer experience, they have this set of practices that they perform routinely, the things they need to do to design, implement, and manage customer experience in a disciplined way. it's just habit. It's just the way they do things, right? And we all know people who are this way with eating healthy and exercise. They get up and every single morning they go to the gym. It's just become a habit. It doesn't feel like something extra they have to do. Great customer experience companies have those types of habits as part of every single role in the organization. And we looked at, well, what are the practices that are most important for companies to have in place? And they fell into 6 big categories, which we call the 6 disciplines of customer experience maturity. One is a set of habits around strategy, which is really, do we know what kind of experience we want to deliver to our customers? And are we making sure that everybody in the organization knows it? Really serves as a guiding North Star, so that at any given moment when somebody says, what's the right thing to do here, they can point to this overarching strategy to guide them. Now that strategy is only going to be solid if it's based on a strong customer understanding. And so having a disciplined system for understanding who your customers are and what they want from the experience is absolutely essential to having the right strategy. It's also essential to having the right design. And the experience design practices are what help make sure that the concepts we come up with actually translate into service designs, website designs, experience designs that are going to deliver the type of experience we're hoping for. So this first set of practices is really about having a systematic way to define the right experience for your company and your customers. The next set of practices come in the execution side of the house, right? Measurement. We have to figure out, are we actually delivering on the design that we set out to deliver? Governance, which is the set of checks and balances that we use to say, hey, if things aren't going the way we're expecting them to go, how do we adjust our sails to move ourselves in the direction of where we're looking to go? And then finally, culture. And I tend to think of the culture practices and habits as being the things that help us create and maintain an environment where employees do the things in the other 5 categories, not because the process says they have to, but because they fundamentally believe it's the right thing to do. And so this last set of disciplines is what gives you the ability to consistently deliver and improve that experience. And you need both of them. And I'll talk a little bit about why you need both of them when I talk about the third challenge, which is thinking that measurement equals customer understanding. So much of the challenge in customer experience today is being able to step outside yourself and really understand who your customers are, what they want, the world they live in, how they talk about things. And this is difficult for people to do in general, anybody, because we live in our own worlds, and putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, taking that perspective is a difficult thing to do. And in a lot of companies, the way they try to do that, or their first approach to doing that, is through data, and in particular quantitative data. And there's nothing wrong with that as part of the approach, but it leaves a lot of gaps in a lot of organizations that are particularly dangerous from a customer experience perspective. So when we were designing the customer experience maturity framework, we intentionally separated the customer understanding discipline from the measurement discipline, even though they overlap quite a bit. And here's why we did that. We did that because the goals of the disciplines are different. The goal of the customer understanding discipline is, not to be redundant, but to understand who customers are and what they want from their interactions with the company. It's an inherently qualitative goal. There's an empathy, a perspective part to it. We want to understand people on a human level. In measurement, it's an inherently quantitative goal. We want to quantify customer experience quality and its relationship to business health to guide management decisions. Both of these are critically important to a successful customer experience management program, but they're fundamentally different in the nature of the activities. Now where this gets confusing sometimes is that voice of the customer programs tend to sit at the intersection of these two, because a lot of what you need to understand your customers will come from a voice of the customer program. You understand your customers from things like survey responses, particularly open-ended responses, call transcripts, emails, and social media posts, which for many companies are under the umbrella of their VOC program. But there are other things that companies can and should use to understand their customers, interviews of those customers, field observations, employee input. There are so many things about customers that they either can't articulate to us or won't articulate to us, that if we only listen to what they tell us, we miss out on some really important things. So we need to supplement what comes out of a Voice of the Customer program with these additional techniques to really understand our customers in the deep and empathetic way that we need to in today's business environment. Now on the measurement side, a lot of the data that we use to measure experience quality does in fact come from a VOC program, right? Many of those survey questions are structured and they give us numbers, percentage of agreements with a statement, Net Promoter Score ratings, all those types of things. But there's all sorts of other data, quantitative data, that helps us measure the customer experience that isn't Voice of the Customer. Behavioral analytics, web analytics, call center analytics, operations and process data, financial data. There's all of this data that has to come together to help us understand, okay, here's what the customer perceived, why? What happened during that interaction that might have led them to perceive that? And so understanding the two purposes of a Voice of the Customer program and really of a customer experience management program, I think is a really powerful exercise in helping people to make sure that they're getting the information that they need and that they're using the information that they have in all of the ways that they need to really get a great experience. Because I find that if companies focus too much on the measurement side of things, there's a certain aspect of the experience, the humanity of the experience, that is often lost. And if they focused too much on the qualitative, there may be some patterns of behavior or operational data or things that they might miss out on. And so it really is about having a balance between those two and understanding that your VOC program in fact serves two masters, which is directly related to the fourth challenge, which is that people aren't sure what to do differently. We get all this data, we look at all of this information, we understand what our customers want, but how do we take that information and turn it into some sort of a different behavior? This, I think, is one of the biggest barriers to action among the employee ranks. And in fact, one of my favorite books is a book called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard, by Chip and Dan Heath. And it's got a really great perspective on change management. And it says that a lot of us really misdiagnose what the problem is when people aren't making a behavior change that we'd like them to make. And one of the principles that they use is this idea that what looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. So we think, we hope, that if we give people that North Star, if we give people some guiding principles about the customer experience, that they'll just figure out what to do in order to deliver that experience. And on the front lines, that may be closer to true. But as people get deeper and deeper into the organization and into that ecosystem, it's not necessarily always the case. And so we look for examples of companies that have really helped employees sketch out and understand what are the behaviors that ripple through the organization in the way you want them to. So my colleague Sam Stern featured a great example of this in a report that he did recently, a case study on Hampton Hotels and how they help their employees do this. And they have what they've called 9 game changers. So these are very specific behaviors for general managers in a hotel to do, sometimes multiple times a day, sometimes every day, weekly, every 2 weeks. Now, it's not to say that managers couldn't figure this out, but having them documented as a discipline, first of all, it helps train new folks, but we all get busy. we all can forget things. That's why even airline pilots use checklists. And so having things that remind us, hey, these are the things we need to make sure we do every day, right? Know the score, review our data, cover the end zone, provide support to the front desk during check-in and check-out. If someone's in that moment and they're trying to decide, do I do X or do I do Y, knowing that these are the biggest game changers for customer experience is sometimes just the bump we need to go do it. And in fact, in this particular case, there was a paperwork policy that said that general managers had to have their paperwork in by a certain time of the day, but that time of the day directly conflicted with this game changer to cover the end zone, because they were supposed to get the paperwork in the morning, and that was when good managers knew they needed to be supporting the checkout process. And so you can look at the ripple effect of these frontline game changers and help people in the back office identify, here's how I need to shift my thinking and what I do. And we're seeing an increase in the use of tools that help people visualize what the experience is and what they need to do to support it. One of those tools is called a learning map. This is one that was created by VCA Animal Hospitals to help employees understand what the customer experience landscape was, who the customers are, and where they fit in the overall process of the operation of the business, and how what they do ripples up to customers. One of my favorite examples was using a similar kind of map. It was actually a journey map, but this company, Dovetail, used it as a role-playing exercise. So they turned a customer journey map into almost a board game and would role-play different scenarios with employees to talk about, okay, if this situation happens, what would we do? But it was in a game-type format, which helped people think through these scenarios and develop the judgment and the wisdom to make some of these calls on the fly. But it made talking about the customer experience and talking about how to think about the customer experience into something that was extremely fun. But there's one other thing that we have to get through in order to help our employees put many of these ideas into action, which is the challenge that too many people believe that employee motivation is the problem. Now, there are certainly employees that do not think about the customer as much as we would like them to. But over the course of 8.5 years of researching in this area, I generally find that most people want to do the right thing by the customer. Maybe they think of the customer differently. Maybe they're not quite sure what the right thing is. But over and over and over again, what I hear from employees is, I would love to do the right thing. I can't. I don't have the tools. I don't have the information. I'm not allowed. Which is why one of the other classic lines in Switch I think is really important for those of us who are in charge of customer experience programs to remember. What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. It may not be that the people don't want to do the right thing. It's that something in the situation means they can't. And my colleague TJ Kitt, who does a lot of research on collaboration platforms and technologies for workers inside a company, has a great framework for thinking about what is it that employees need to be active participants in a healthy customer experience ecosystem. They need free movement of data and information. They need to have access to all of that information that helps them understand customers and measure. We can't lock it up in an ivory tower, and we can't make it really hard for people to get at when they need to get at it. We need free movement of people. They need to be able to come and go, and if they have to be on the road or out in the front with customers, they need to be able to do that. And free interaction between individuals. If we have this complex of an ecosystem, we need to be able to understand who else is in the ecosystem and how we can interact with them and be able to interact with them without having to jump through a bunch of hurdles or processes or things that make it more difficult for us to connect with the people that we need to connect to in this constantly evolving web of relations, as we use in the definition of an ecosystem. So one of the recommendations that we make for people in charge of customer experience programs, and I wrote a case study several years ago actually about a project that American Express did to do exactly this, is ask employees what gets in their way. What information don't they have that they need? What are the limitations of certain systems that stop them from doing things they want to do? What are some processes that just make it too cumbersome? Policies that don't make sense. Or maybe the policy makes sense in the general case, but maybe there are some specific permutations that just end up coming out wonky. That's one of the things that came out of that American Express project. They created a policies and procedures office that allows an employee to nominate a particular policy or procedure for consideration, saying, hey, I get why we put this policy into place, but I think it might be causing things that you didn't think it was going to cause, and maybe we need to think about it again. So there's some mechanism for employees to sort of raise a flag and say, hey guys, we might want to take a look at this again. And even things like their schedules or the technology that they have available or the work environment. If you're expected to be friendly to customers all day, but you work in a work environment that is too hot and too cramped and not terribly friendly, it's hard for even the nicest person to keep up that friendly demeanor in that kind of an environment. So even as we think about how to motivate people to act around the customer experience more, I think we need to ask ourselves the question, how do we remove the barriers to them acting on the intrinsic motivation that they already have? And the companies that are doing that, we're seeing quite a bit of success. So those are the 5 common CX challenges that I wanted to walk you through today. Let me leave you with a handful of recommendations that go a little further than what I've already talked about. First of all, define customer experience early and often. This is new for people. It's just similar enough to things they've heard that they may think they get it, but there are a lot of nuances to it. And there are a lot of nuances to the ecosystem. And so it takes repetition and it takes reiteration for people to really start to internalize it and get what this complicated system that they're a part of actually looks like and actually means. Focus on customer understanding, not just metrics. One of the things I see in the most successful programs, even metrics programs, is that they're constantly remembering that metrics are designed to represent a concept that we care about. So if we're measuring the time it takes to answer the phone, it's because the concept is that we want to be efficient and we don't want to waste our customers' time. So always come back to the customer's world in that qualitative way and understand that if we're tracking a particular metric, it's because there's an underlying concept that we care about. That's really going to help us keep that empathy, keep that perspective that we need to think about customer experience in the right way. Use customer experience tools to help people visualize the experience. We have tools like journey maps and learning maps, personas, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to help people take this intangible thing that is the experience, particularly for any of you who work in services businesses. It's extremely hard to think about what does that experience look like. We have more and more ways to represent that on paper and in videos and in increasingly sophisticated technology tools. Use them because it helps remove some of that abstractness and get people to go, oh, I see what you mean. It's when this person goes from here to here to here, and that's how they do this. And it's very powerful, especially for a lot of people who are visual thinkers. And help others see what CX discipline means for them. We've had a number of organizations that have done ecosystem mapping workshops or sessions with employees where they sit down and say, if this is what we're promising to our customers or our clients, let's talk about how the work you do affects it. And one of the favorite stories in a book I just finished reading is about a hospital custodian. And they talk about what his job description said his job was, which was mopping floors and cleaning toilets and all sorts of unglamorous things, and versus how he defined his job. He defined his job as caring for patients and helping create an environment for patients and their families that made a difficult medical situation a little bit easier. So he was able to identify things he could do in the way he did his job or in little things that weren't officially in his job description that helped him play a role in this. And the guy was a janitor, but he didn't see it as just being a janitor. He saw it as being part of this patient experience ecosystem. Extremely powerful. And I've also found from talking to employees that have been through this, it makes their work more meaningful. It helps them connect to the larger mission of the business and feel like what they do matters more than perhaps if they just think they're slaving away in a back office somewhere. And then finally, break down the barriers to doing the right thing. As you start to find these things that employees can do and want to do, find out what you can do to remove some of the issues. Sometimes it's a technology project. We're going to consolidate things that you have to go to 8 screens for now. We're going to put it together on one screen. Sometimes it's as simple as a policy change or giving people a little more flexibility in their schedules. And very often those things cost next to nothing and can have some really powerful results. So that's all I have in terms of insight into those 5 challenges, but I think Stacy is now going to take you through some additional challenges specific to VOC. Stacy?
Yes, thank you, Megan. And thank you everyone for joining us. So as Megan mentioned, my name is Stacy Neville, and I work with Confirmit. I'm the Director of Voice of the Customer Consulting. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about overcoming common hurdles in your VOC program, and basically on the road to that VOC program excellence. So we've heard a lot about challenges with customer experience overall, and what we're going to talk about now, and I think Megan mentioned that Voice of the Customer is a piece of that. It's a very integral piece of that, but it is a piece of the customer experience, and it helps us understand that customer experience even better. So what we're going to talk about are some common challenges that some practitioners, VOC practitioners, face when either they're implementing programs or running programs. And this is information that we actually gathered from a few of our own VOC heroes, as we call them, about how to jump over those hurdles successfully. So recently, I actually had the chance to interview several of our clients all with different, from different aspects of the program, some with relatively new programs and some with mature programs, about what they perceived as their biggest challenges and how they were able to move past those issues and gain success from their programs. And we established that they were successful in these programs because many of these companies that we interviewed were actually winners of an internal award that we have called the Confirmit ACE Award. And it stands for Achievement in Customer Excellence. So they've exhibited a level of excellence in their programs, and they're often considered best-in-class programs. So they do know of what they speak, and they were able to give me some insight about what they saw over the years as some of their biggest challenges. So it looks like this gentleman is having a rather bad day. And I really hope that none of us feel like this in our everyday lives at work. But I think over the course of our careers, we probably can all remember a moment or two when the challenge that was in front of us seemed insurmountable. And maybe we thought about, am I going to get up from this? And we realized at Confirmit and throughout our VOC industry that we often talk about how hard Voice of the Customer is, how hard understanding the customer experience is, and it's difficult to implement, to manage, and to sustain. And what we wanted to do was talk a little bit about how we overcome that. We talk about how, much like this track, Voice of the Customer measurement, the customer experience management is never ending. It continues, it goes on. So as long as we have customers, we're going to have a customer experience to manage and improve. And Voice of the Customer is a huge part of managing that experience. So we've pulled together, like I said, some best practice advice from our experiences and that of our clients and partners. And we're going to talk about some of those common challenges and how we overcome them. Because in life and in business, we all face hurdles. But there's always a way to get over them. and we're going to help you do that. So one of the things that we know intrinsically is that voice of the customer programs, understanding what your customers are thinking, doing, how they feel about your products and your services, it does drive better customer experience. They drive success. They lead us to make better informed decisions. And they do that because they lead us to manage what we're measuring. They also lead us to identify critical issues that our customers are facing, be more focused. And they also lead us to informed decision making. So we're using the voice of our customers when we're making decisions about our products, our services, our hours of operation, our policies and procedures. So I just wanted to give a very quick example here of how a client that I've had has used this to basically manage what they're measuring. When we came on board with this particular client, they were managing an internal program. They had a scorecard, they had a measurement program, and what they had decided through the scorecard is that 25% of the scorecard was going to be devoted to their voice of the customer measurements. So there's a focus on it. We often talk about how that's a wonderful thing. The challenge was their focus was on, in this case, detractors. Their focus was on the negative behavior. So how do we reduce this? It was on how many detractors do you have? And that caused the business, the organization, to manage to what they were measuring. So what they had was an environment where we were focused on the negative, we were focused on the detractor, and we're focused on how do we make fewer of those. But not necessarily fewer for the organization. It became a focus on how do I make fewer for me, because it's my scorecard. So what we had was an environment of pass the buck. And one of the first things we did was change that incentive to focus on the positive. So let's focus on making more of the happy people, in this case promoters. Let's focus on that. And what we saw over time was the behavior within the business changed. The behavior stopped being one of finger pointing and the kind of wasn't me syndrome. And it became one of best practice sharing and recognition, quite frankly. And that was the environment we wanted to create. That was what we wanted to measure to instead of measuring to the negative. So one other thing that a great VOC program can do is also promote balance in the actions that we take. And a well-run program will promote that balance through actions and improvements. Often we talk about this in terms of the ROI of our program. So from this graph we can see that when starting out, programs don't really reap an immediate benefit. It may be a little slow going at first. But those smaller operational improvements, we often call them the low-hanging fruit, they'll begin to pay off with increased satisfaction, increased loyalty, increased goodwill among your customers, because we're solving those one-off problems, we're fixing things, we're responding to the feedback that we're getting. And then as time goes on, and we collect some critical mass of data, and we're able to do some analysis and really understand the larger strategic issues, our teams can begin to use for more strategic resolution and growth. And then often we'll see that much larger lift in satisfaction and loyalty with the products and services and the interactions that they're having with their actual customer experience. So over time, this is what we're looking for from our Voice of the Customers programs. And they do promote that success. And we can measure that success, or that ROI as we talk about it, in many different ways. These are a few examples that we've seen with some of our clients. And it can be measured through additional revenue, as in the case with Cessna. It can be measured through a reduction in customer defections. It can be measured through an increased employee engagement or retention, as well as process improvements. But the journey to all of this success, we understand, can seem quite daunting. And sometimes it feels like we're encountering these hurdles at every step in the process. So it's not just one hurdle we have to overcome. There's these series of hurdles. In my time building and managing Voice of the Customer programs, and in the recent conversations with my clients that we've mentioned, we've summed up the common hurdles in 3 categories, the most common hurdles that we've seen. And they would be building a strong foundation for your program, gaining organizational alignment with what you're trying to accomplish, and incorporating employees. I think this actually dovetails very nicely into some of what Megan was sharing earlier, talking about those key elements of building a strong Voice of the Customer program. So first we'll talk about building a solid foundation. And the first step would be clearly stating your objectives and your definition of success, linking to business outcomes and program governance. We'll dive into that a little bit. So when it comes to objective planning, what we've seen, and one of the challenges I've seen, is many companies want to jump right in. They either want to jump right into questionnaire planning, or there's a need to, whether it be for time or resources, there's a need to get data in-house very quickly. There's a very short time frame or turnaround time frame to get that data in and start taking action on that data. And that engagement level is phenomenal. However, when we don't take the time to step back and effectively plan the program that should be ongoing, we should not rush into it, then we often run into hurdles. So this is a stage that we call it confirm it, define, where we work with our clients and we suggest setting out those objectives, understanding what your success criteria might be, and really understanding at the end of some time period, 6 months or a year, what is success going to look like for me? What will I have accomplished? What is this program? What do I want this program to help me do? And linking to business outcomes, so one of the things that we've seen, and I think this was actually in a recent Forrester study, is that they found about 30% of folks surveys, businesses surveys, felt that their VOC efforts were extremely valuable in improving their customers' experience. However, it was only about 40% of that same group who felt their VOC program was showing the value when it came to delivering financial results. So this is another hurdle. We've got a program, but we're not seeing the value out of it. And one of the major reasons for that is that we're not linking to our actual business outcomes. We're not tracking the success, and we're not quantifying the ROI. And the result of that is when we often see either our executive staff or our front line is not on board with the program, we'll have dissenters in our organization who are often verbal about the program not producing what they thought it was going to produce. And we have a situation where people are not engaged. Often you'll hear things like it's the program of the month, the quarter, or the year, because we don't have that engagement. And one way to bypass that is to, in that planning phase, in that define phase, really link our program to the business outcomes. Help the organization understand what problems that the business is experiencing are we trying to solve with the data we're going to get from this program. And that can come in any one of these 3 categories, and sometimes more than one, whether it be through increasing the revenue, reducing some cost, maybe it's call center related, or improving the culture change, or improving the culture of the organization through some form of cross-functional change, or building a more customer-centric organization. And then the final step here is that program governance and resourcing. So the same Forrester study I mentioned earlier actually said that 64% of companies surveyed believe they had active executive support. But the reality is that still leaves 36% that are operating without that executive support. And then what form does that executive support come in? Is it really active participation in the program? And another piece of information from that report was that 34% of those same companies felt that they were operating with adequate resources. So when you don't have a governance structure and you don't have the actual resources that you may need to run the program, it does send a message to your organization. if we're serious about the collection of voice of the customer data, if we're serious about measuring and managing the customer experience, then we will need to apply the necessary cross-functional resources to that. So this is the display of, it's not just one group. I think as Megan mentioned earlier, it's not just one group that's responsible for the customer experience or voice of the customer. This is something that you want your entire organization engaged in. And I do realize that this is easier said than done in today's environment, where many of our functions are under-resourced. But we've had clients over time, especially the ones I spoke to for this, that have found creative ways to get around some of that, whether it be through champion networks or kind of management track rotations through the program, or external resourcing and consultancy to try to work things out. One of our clients actually said that he found it easier to get external resources periodically when he needed them than to ask for a head count. But he's found a creative way to basically supply, to get the resources that he needed to fund his program. Now we're going to move on to the second hurdle, which is gaining organizational alignment, which I think goes very nicely after program governance. And affectionately I call this getting our ducks in a row. So how do we help our organization have a shared view of the customer experience and help them prioritize the actions that they need to take and understand what that roadmap looks like, that customer experience roadmap looks like for the organization? So as I just mentioned, Megan said customer experience and voice of the customer, it's not just one group. It is the organization. And the entire organization needs to share that vision of the customer experience and how they facilitate that experience. So that's what this will hope to do. So that shared view of the customer often begins with something that may look like a customer journey map. Or do you understand the different phases that your customer would go through? So understand the touch points. And some of that is not just thinking about it in terms of the individual touch points, but in terms of the actual journey. Because we lose a lot. There's a lot that happens between those touch points. And we want to make sure that we understand that. So this is an example of one journey map. But it's really those pieces at the top that understand what those different touch points may be. And what we want to do after that is really understand how to prioritize our focus once we understand what those touch points may be. This is another example of a journey map and a prioritized journey map that a client has used, where we were able to not only map the journey, but understand which ones of those were moments of truth, which ones of those were most critical. And then there was an internal assessment about, okay, how are we doing in those areas? That allowed us to kind of prioritize, okay, where are we going first? What area do we need to focus on first? Again, journey mapping can be an extremely daunting task for an organization. Sometimes it helps to chunk out the work that needs to be done and really look at where we need to focus. So prioritize. Those numbers at the bottom, that was just really the organization saying, well, which areas of the organization play a role in these particular touch points? So, and to what extent do they play a role? What is their influence on that particular area? It helped them inform who needs to be on the team, who needs to be consulted when building touch point or feedback for those individual touch points or gathering information in whatever form that came. It helped us really prioritize who we needed to speak to and which areas we needed to speak to first. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're sharing the roadmap. These are just examples of different roadmaps, and I loved Megan's example also, the VCA learning map, really understanding how that journey interacted with where employees felt they fit into that journey. But you want to make sure that you're sharing your roadmap in whatever form it's in, just internally, definitely, to socialize that and really have your employees get on board with what that roadmap is. And in many cases, sharing it externally. We've got clients that have shared that data with a select group of customers to make sure and vet that this really is the journey that you're going through, what you're experiencing. We want to make sure we're doing this from the customer perspective. So often to get that, you'll need to talk to your customers. So when we completely vet it, and we know what the journey is and we completely vet it, it really will help us also break down some of the silos that are throughout our organization. So once we have something like this, it basically will allow us to look across our organization and have folks within our organization have a shared understanding of where we're headed, where we're going as an organization. And the consistent vetting or sharing of this information will basically lead to continued refinement. So like a VOC program, we need to step back every once in a while and refine it because your customer experience is going to change. As you come out with new products or new policies or new features, that experience may change over time. And we want to make sure that our roadmaps, our touch points are staying current with what's actually happening with our clients. I did want to add a few words of warning, especially concerning journey mapping. As I said before, journey mapping can be a very daunting task. It can be very time-consuming and a lot of work for an organization to undertake. But we've had some clients that have had success with focusing on one segment or one touch point of the journey initially, maybe on one area of the business, and then documenting and quantifying the value of their quick wins, basically to prove that business case. It helps prove the ROI of that program within a smaller unit of the organization, and it helps build an internal appetite for joining the process, as well as a roadmap for how to join the process for other parts of the organization later on. So the last step is incorporating employee insights, and their input actually. So as Megan said, ask employees what gets in their way. We want to measure and manage the employee engagement. We want to socialize the customer centricity that we're experiencing. We also want to listen to the voice of the customer, the voice of the customer through the voice of the employee. They know a lot, and often if we just ask, they'll be willing to share it. I think I jumped ahead there. I did not. So a recent Gallup study found that 70% of U.S. employees said that they were either actively disengaged or not engaged at work. And that's an alarming statistic because that impacts our customers, it impacts our customer experience negatively. With disengaged employees, an interesting fact saying that 67% of employees engaged employees advocate for their company, but only 3% of the disengaged do. 31% of disengaged employees believe they can positively impact their company's product quality. And only 17% of disengaged employees claim high understanding of their customer needs. So that is definitely going to, when your employees are disengaged, they're going to very negatively affect your customer experience. So there's a great tie to working on that engagement and even understanding what it is so that you can possibly change it. This is an example of an employee engagement program that is run at Macy's. This is internal, and it's basically employees celebrating employees, spreading their stories internally and recognizing each other for work well done. This is another example of one of our clients and how they socialize the voice of the customer feedback and share their stories. And it's basically an intranet to share their results, their stories, and any news related to their customer experience and VOC programs. It often functions as kind of an internal Facebook-like site for them. And even their CEO has been seen commenting and sharing stories. So it really helps drive engagement for this tool. They've had great success just using a tool to share this information. And then finally, one of our clients actually collects voice of the customer through the employee, which has helped, one, gather information about the customer experience before a customer even reports it, but it helped build a certain level of value for their employees, because they're valued for their insights and they're trusted to help in this customer experience journey. So basically, what we're hoping is that we realize that every worthwhile accomplishment, these hurdles, so big or small, that they have their stages of drudgery and triumph. At the beginning, it's a struggle, but we're going to get to that victory. And then hopefully, you all, like me, will find a joy in overcoming all of these obstacles. So thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Megan. So before we dive into the Q&A, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some upcoming events. We do have another webinar on September 11th with Miguel Ramos, who is Confirmit's mobile expert. He will be talking about how mobile insights can improve your value of customer feedback. And secondly, we do have our last community conference for 2014 in San Francisco on September 25th. We will have a pre-event workshop on September 24th, right around the corner from the conference, and that is going to be more of a hands-on training. So CCC 14 San Francisco will bring together representatives from all industries, and it will hopefully inspire new thinking and generate ideas to boost the success of your VOC, employee engagement, and market research programs. Lastly, we do have another event, a live event in Calgary, Canada on September 30th. This is going to be a best practices seminar, and speakers will cover the topics that will help you take your efforts to the next level. You can find more information about these events on Confirmit.com. So let's jump into some of the questions. Megan, this one is directed to you. How can managers and directors lead upward to get executives to really understand what it takes to succeed at customer experience?
It's a great question, and I think it's one of the bigger challenges. But I think using the core voice of the customer process, where you're gathering feedback, you're looking at what we can do to address issues. As part of that, the root cause analysis, taking a look at, if we assume everybody here had the best intentions in mind, how did this happen? And not in any sort of a blameful way, but what connections didn't exist? What information did somebody not have? What checks and balances could we put in place to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again? The more they start to see that in a very tactical way, the more they start to understand these almost chaos theory type effects that can happen. I think also sitting down with their organization and looking at their business processes, looking at the things that they own, and saying, look, I'm not trying to change you from an engineer into a customer experience professional, or from a finance manager into a customer experience professional. I want to help you be a customer experience literate engineer, a customer experience literate finance professional. Let's take a look at the steps that you could add to your processes that would help make you that. And in fact, I've done this in a workshop with clients where we've had them map out an existing, say, project approval process using sticky notes on butcher paper. And then we talk about, okay, where along this process could you think about customer experience, ask about customer experience, what would you need to know, what information would you need to get, what people would you need to bring in. And that gives them a very, very tactical sense of what the activities are, and they very quickly start to see the million little places every day where this happens. And so they start to understand what it really means when we say customer experience is everybody's job. And I think that helps them understand the scale and the scope that simply comes with the scale of most organizations today.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, Stacy, you could take this one. Where do you see the role of training employees and educating your customers about their services and products?
I think the role of training is often needs to be an ongoing one. I do understand that in today's world, many of our organizations, we train employees when they first join. We train employees when they first get on board. But I've seen several companies actually do a few things. One is have a track within their training that is focused on the customer experience, that is focused on how they use customer information and educate. If you have things like that customer journey map that's already in place, take that time to educate on that. It's not just a training of the systems or the product, but it becomes also, they add a track that's training about how to facilitate the customer experience, what role everyone plays in the customer experience, and how that applies to them. But also it would be great to, and some companies are doing this now, to come back after some period of time or offer kind of ongoing training, whether it be through webinars or town halls or different types of meetings that will help keep the focus on the customer experience as well as the company's attention to the voice of the customer.
Okay, thanks.
And this is, Megan, if I could just jump in and throw in one more thing there. I absolutely agree with the point that you have to think of training as an ongoing thing. And I think this is a great example of a place where if you step outside the normal way of thinking, one of the big things that helps create and sustain customer-centric culture in an organization is rituals and routines. And rituals and routines are a form of training. They're a form of socialization. So storytelling, sharing, mentoring, daily lineups, things like that, those are all the sort of micro-training exercises that really help work this into people's day-to-day habits. And so I think thinking about those things as part of the overall training curriculum helps you take that continuous stream of training and make it even more continuous and even more sort of omnipresent.
Okay, thanks, Megan, for adding to that. So we are over the time. So if you did submit a question and we did not get a chance to answer it, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Megan and Stacy, thank you again for presenting, and thank you all for joining today's webinar. We hope to see you at our next one in September. Thank you.